Hi, I'm Mike Zyda, and today's presentation is entitled, Can we replace all or mostly all in-game class teaching with educational games? And this is from an IEEE computer magazine column I wrote called the Games Column, number 3. So let me share the slides and bring those up. Here we are, got that guy. Do that. Play, make it full screen. And then I think I'll bring my picture over here. It's just going to be up at the top corner. And hopefully that's okay with you. Anyway, can we replace all or mostly all in-game teaching with educational games? And many people are wondering whether we can replace in-classroom teaching with educational games. In this column are my thoughts on this possibility. Now that we have done the great big Zoom experiment during COVID with teaching, we all now know that we don't necessarily need classrooms, that we can do almost everything over the wire with teaching in either synchronous or asynchronous fashion. And we probably don't even need synchronous teaching, as many of our students this last year have been stuck in China, India, and other places overseas on a different time zone due to a xenophobic US government policy of demanding that students not physically in classrooms stay out of the United States. There is no better way to make enemies and feed the maw of the military-industrial complex for conflict dollars. And because of this, there's no better time to reopen the trope of, can we replace all or almost all in-person teaching with educational games? And the answer is, of course we can, but there is some work to be done and some issues to resolve and some lucre to be obtained. Let's start out a bit with respect to Zoom and move on from there. What we know from the last year and a half of Zoom teaching experience is that a large number of our students were perfectly fine with just looking at the recorded Zoom lectures at their leisure. While many attended the Zoom online attempt to simulate the in-classroom experience, many others just watched the lectures when they had time instead of 3 a.m. time in China. There did not seem to be any difference in learning outcomes between the students that watched synchronously versus those that rescheduled the show for a later, more appropriate time. I believe this means that while universities want students in the classroom using their real estate stock, that the students could learn just as well from the recordings, with the only issues being in class presentations by students, the need for students to meet in person for group projects, and the need for students to have their questions answered, which is well solved by iMessage, WeChat, text messaging, Slack, and even their grandfather's tool of email. We have ways to ask and answer questions that do not require an entire room of 100 students wait while one student queries the instructor. Udemy and Coursera and the others of that ilk already know this. And those of us in universities now know this because of our last year and a half on Zoom. And we see other evidence that classroom instruction is not necessary. Students of this generation are well skilled in using the internet, Google search, and YouTube as learning platforms. Even my 5-year-old granddaughter seeks out the right YouTube video when she wants to know how things work, like how to perform an oil change and how squirrel highways can be made. So we have lots of asynchronous self-directed learning happening that is oppositional to the way of thinking of the education real estate industrial complex. So do we need interactive educational games for our spawn? I believe the answer is yes. If those educational games are well built and sufficiently entertaining, with educational bits slid in as collateral learning. Collateral learning is the learning that happens by some mechanism other than formal teaching. In 1997, Colonel Rick Satava, MD, created a virtual reality for medicine program for DARPA and gave a presentation where he indicated that digital game natives were being found to be better surgeons than their non-game playing cohorts. He even gave them the name Nintendo surgeons. It additionally turned out that these Nintendo surgeons also displayed exceptional business skills, is what he indicated at the time. And at that time, it became clear that creating a science of games, the scientific and engineering method for building educationally imbued games, and understanding and analyzing gameplay had become essential. It unfortunately never happened, but it got a lot of us thinking. From May 2000 to March of 2004, I directed the development of the America's Army game at the Naval Postgraduate School. Our team built this wonderful AAA title that became one of the top 5 online games when it came out in 2002, and when the 2.0 version came out in October 2003 as well, with lots of new great features and experiences. And here's a quote from an article I drafted in 2005. 6 to 9 months after its America's Army release, mothers would meet me and complain that my son is playing America's Army 5 to 6 hours a day, 7 days a week. What is going to become of him? I would usually answer that these children would be twice as likely to consider a career in the US Army as those who didn't play the game, something the US Army counts on with respect to the game's recruiting mission. When I asked the mothers if their children knew a lot about the US Army, the mothers usually responded that they know everything about the Army, having learned it from the game. Wouldn't it be nice if playing games could teach them something more useful, is usually how they would respond. And these comments led us to wonder how much of K through 12 science and math education could be taught via games and how we might exploit students' capability for collateral learning. Ultimately, we wondered if we could incorporate all K through 12 science and math education in a highly immersive, highly addictive game. And we called this our first person education grand challenge, a play on the phrase first person shooter. Another experience from America's Army convinced me that game-based education was there in spades with a 2.0 version of the game. In that game, we built a classroom in 3D with an instructor and other students, all of whom you could irritate and interact with. There's some old screenshot from that game. If you sat down and paid attention, the instructor presented the first 3 lectures of basic combat life-saving by way of in-game PowerPoint, followed by a multiple choice test exactly like the one used in the US Army. And if you scored the same passing score as in the real world, then you got to act as a combat medic in the game and heal yourself and friends. You can see people taking the test right here. And now when I first saw this, I thought, no one is going to watch PowerPoint in the game. It's too boring. But it went into the game. And when that version was shipped, the Army found out that some 50% of the people that played the game did the course and passed the test, which is great because during that year, the US Army received a letter from an America's Army game player indicating that they had passed an accident scene and that they had used their combat medic skills to help out and save an accident victim. So if that is not inspiration for game-based education, then nothing is. So my career took a turn at that point, and I decided to go to USC to found the games program and to found a research program on games so that we could perhaps solve some of the hard problems in creating games for education. And I crashed into a wall. Everyone I met with in the US government and various foundations was just interested in the small. No one had funding for a grand vision. We really needed something the size of a UARC, a University Affiliated Research Center, something like USC's ICT. Even a most distinguished foundation came out with a weak program to provide small money, $50,000 if I recall correctly, to study an existing game for its ability to educate. This is completely unimaginative. How did this happen? DARPA was completely AWOL on this as well, again, as it was too grand a vision and couldn't be demoed 90 days after the start of funding. We don't have comprehensive games for education in this country as we don't have the will to fund their development. We'd rather spend $2 trillion over 20 years to replace the Taliban with the Taliban. Many people that I met with in starting on this mission indicated to me that I should just approach the entertainment games industry and see if they would consider making games for education. So in 2005, a staff member of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy asked me to put together a workshop during E3 in a hotel near the Los Angeles Convention Center. They asked me to invite senior leadership from some of the largest game companies in the world. In fact, the first company I called was Electronic Arts. I spoke with an Electronic Arts VP that I knew well and asked if he could come to this workshop. He immediately said that he would first have to chat with Electronic Arts attorneys. Wow, just to come to a workshop. He got back to me in a few days later and said that no one from EA could attend, that attendance by an EA employee could potentially provide a signal that EA was considering moving into the games for education space and could potentially initiate shareholder lawsuits over such a move. I was disheartened. I got the same answer from all of the other large companies I asked. I was able to get some good researchers to come to the workshop, but this was the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, and just not high enough above the fear of shareholder lawsuits to attend a meeting on a potential future direction for the country. Very disheartening. In February 2009, I found myself invited to speak at ETS, Educational Testing Service in Princeton, and I was told there would be an audience of some 500 teachers and that the topic was replacing standardized testing with game-based testing. I decided to give a provocative talk entitled, How to Replace All Teachers with Game-Based Education. And what really was in my mind was that we would build game-based education for the standard math and science, and then the teachers could become tutors for some of the parts that required in-person one-on-one help or questions. And the talk went well, I thought. I started out explaining that many of my students in 2006 had gotten into World of Warcraft, and that some of those students would then suddenly disappear and not attend class for 3 to 4 weeks. They'd come back sheepishly and explain they had become addicted to WoW and that the rest of the world disappeared. And this got me thinking, and I later saw an article that a typical WoW player would spend some 288 hours in the game over 6 months. I began thinking of how much time did a typical K through 12 student spend each day on math and science education. I hypothesized 45 minutes per day on math and 45 minutes on science, 1.5 hour total per day. Now, the Los Angeles Unified School District has 180 school days per academic year. And if we multiply that by 1.5 hours, that is 270 hours of math and science per academic year. This is just about how long children were spending in WoW in 6 months. So I thought if we use information theory and a fantastic team of game designers and subject matter experts, then the cost of 1 year of game-based math and science education will be about the same cost as developing World of Warcraft, about $100 million in 2005 dollars. So if we build all of K through 12 math and science education into an engaging game with collateral learning, would be about $1.3 billion, not a big number, about 1,538 times less than we spent on Afghanistan. We could fund this by a small tax on the $200 billion annual revenue of the game industry. Brain sensors. Another detour I took over a period of 7 years was to be an advisor to a startup, MSense. MSense made a low-cost hybrid EEG device that appeared to have promise in the educational space. Their sensors measured several biometric signals such as EEG, blood oxygen, and motion, and these signals came off the sensors by way of Bluetooth link and provided a number of human emotion state vectors: mental engagement, physical engagement, surprise and response, how much response there is to new material or events, relaxation, valence, which is like or dislike, learning or not learning, and at what difficulty level, eye blink, breathing rate, and pulse rate, among other things. And their sensors could also tell you when the student guessed at an answer. So if they got it right, you could tell them, yes, you got it right, but you guessed, here is why that is the right answer. I totally love what this sensor could do. Unfortunately, as many startups, MSense went out of business in 2011, and I'm sure other sensor companies will eventually follow this path. The largest issue with brain sensing in education is, of course, privacy and the issue of how we would socialize and improve the use of such technology for the classroom. In the educational game space, there are many small companies that are developing games for education. These companies tend to specialize in a small range of age groups. An example of one company that has great software is Age of Learning. Age of Learning specializes in pre-K through early elementary age children, which is a great start, but a long way from providing education for all K through 12. There's even a list online of some 1,255 startups in the educational game space. So maybe if you took all the best ones, pushed them together, perhaps we could achieve our educational goal. So I'm not attempting to research the global market for the development and deployment of educational games. And one country, China, stands out as one to watch. Since 2018, the Chinese Ministry of Education has been focusing on funding AI technology for the development of educational games. And the focus of the ministry has been on tools that can be utilized by teachers to build games for their specific lesson plans. One notable startup, Moe in Shenzhen, is testing its toolset in a school system of 20,000 students and 1,000 teachers. Moe has caught the eye of the Chinese Academy of Science. That academy is looking to provide scientists and testing plans for the efficacy of the utilization of the Moe toolset. For full disclosure, I am an advisor to Moe. Primarily, I cheer them on and help them meet VCs in China. Moe is also building a chain of 3,200 educational game-focused stores throughout China. Every province, every city. It will have an inventory of educational games that cover all aspects of K through 12 education. It's now 10,000 educational games in the inventory at Moe. When I wrote this article for IEEE Computer, it was only 300. It has grown fast. It will utilize machine learning to pick the right educational games for each client child. And this is the investment group. Here's the Moe store. The idea of the Moe store is to look just like an Apple store. And these are just some of the sketches. None of the stores have opened yet. In 2018, China additionally froze the approval of new entertainment games on the market until each game company could provide a plan for how they would develop games in the educational space. In September 2021, China has again frozen the approval of new entertainment games as the government there is worried about gaming addiction for its youth. Phrases like spiritual opium appear in news articles describing their government's concern. We will see where this all goes, and we hope there is no impact on the educational games sector, but the venture people are fairly scared of this. Anyway, this column's been about my thoughts and can we replace in-classroom education with educational games? The answer is a qualified maybe if we have the right designers and the grand scale focus that such a national or international effort requires. With the COVID lockdown this last year and a half, classroom education has seemed a quaint pan to the yesteryear of our parents and grandparents. We're back teaching in classrooms now with the option for students attending on Zoom. We are seeing 35% of the students opting for that and many just waiting for the recordings to be posted so they can learn at a time more appropriate for their home time zone. There's a reference. Acknowledgements. You know, when you put together an article like this, you always talk to some people that are super helpful or have been helpful in the past. And Erin Reynolds of Disney Interactive and Athanos, I'd like to thank her for her wonderful help and discussions on game design and why it is important to propose grand challenges. Brock Doubles for being one of the smartest people I know and understanding the analytics required for game-based learning. And Paul Kozemchak, former National Security Advisor to multiple directors of DARPA, for our wonderful 5-hour-long meetings at the barbecue place across the street from the old DARPA building where we plotted multiple grand challenges in technology during my almost 21 years working inside of the US government. There's a Facebook group called IEEE Computer, the games column. I have a link for it in the slides. I'll put the slides up somewhere for you. I'll take any questions in that Facebook group if you wish, or just come up to me on Facebook and chat or send me an email. And if you have any questions, and I'm Mike Zyda, I'm the games editor for IEEE Computer, and this has been the games column. You have a great day. Stop sharing. We'll see you next time and next article.